Hi everyone, in this video we're going to create a React Node.js single sign-on with OAuth, and we're going to have like sign in with Google button and make it work with the backend and save it on a database and all of this sweet kind of stuff working together in peace. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to have like React application in the front end, complete server working with like a brand new Express.js with Node.js, and of course Passport.js working together and an API. And of course we're going to be using single sign-on, or what is known like OAuth2 from Google side, so we can create something like allows us to log in with Google or sign in with Google or just do Google, this kind of traditional stuff you know about and you see everywhere nowadays. And that's what we're going to be doing it, setting up from scratch, from start to finish, and everything's going to be like with a server. It's going to be super secured. Everything's going to be secured on the server with like communicating with the React application via RESTful API, and everything's going to be working together pretty fine. So that's pretty much the demo is going to be creating for that video. For example, this is a React application. So that's what you see. For example, welcome home. You've got your home page basically. If you go to login, you're going to get this sign in with Google or register with Google. So this button does both. It does sign in and sign up, or log in and register both the same time in here. So if you click it, you're going to get this really traditional awesome pop-up that allows you to choose like an account to continue to React SSO, which is basically the application you're going to be creating and registering with Google Developer Console. So here you choose, for example, your account. You're going to get like, thank you for logging in, auto close, and it's going to redirect you and it's going to say, welcome back, Sam Upwood. And this is my name set on Google's end. It's not set here or something. This is being actually fetched from Google's end and set there and fetched properly and having it here, and everything working in harmony and peace and as beautiful as that. So that's basically what we're going to be creating in this video. So just like put your hands on, grab something to drink, a tea or something, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So the most basic part that we need to get started with is creating the Express server. So here's actually, I got a pretty basic project, and in fact, I didn't create this project from scratch, nor I just like set it up from scratch. I cloned it from my previous project. So if you're watching my videos constantly, you're gonna find like I did a complete video about creating a register and login API, all in Express with Node.js Express and Passport.js with GWT authentication and everything. So that project is that one. So it has everything. It has batteries included. It has, the login and register, has passport support, it has GWT and everything. So those kind of things are already like set up in here. And that's why I wanted to use this, because most of the times when you try to like include or have a single sign in your application, you're going to be adding it into an existing application. So you have like a pretty big code base, your server there setting up around. So you want to add this into it. So you're going to explore the code and you add it into it. Plus, this kind of like project has everything you're going to be needing. So it has like Sequelize for ORM for our MySQL database. It has Passport.js set up with GWT, but still we're going to be doing like setup for OAuth as well. It has some like login and register as well, some user kind of like model to work with our database, so we can save and see how data can fly back and forth. And also we got a decent setup with like the app.js in here. So clearly it has like a couple of like course and body parsers and JSON support and Helbin and Morgan and all that kind of stuff for like, login and all that kind of stuff for, development kind of heavy, and it kind of like helps a lot. So that's why I chose to go with this. And if you want these projects, you can simply go ahead into like description below. You're going to find in description below. You can go and clone it and you can start from scratch as I'm here. So you're going to find the same code I'm having right here and you can get started with. So that's the basic projects. That's all you need to do. Now, since we're going to be creating a Google single sign-on and we're going to be like including or having Google OAuth into our application, well, we need to have like authorization tokens from Google site. And as we all know, Google has like this Google Cloud apps and this Google Cloud libraries. And it has this huge ecosystem of, Google apps connected together with Google Cloud and Firebase and all of that sort of stuff. So we have to go ahead, create like an application registered with Google Console. It's for developers, of course. So you just do that, you give it a name or whatever, and Google gonna give you like a client ID and a client secret. And those two are gonna allow you to access the Google API, and therefore we can allow it, or we can use those like client secret and client ID. It's going to be used by our application to authenticate on Google servers and be able to like use OAuth, so we can like have register with Google or sign in with Google in our application. So that's basically how it's done. And the most basic part for all of this is you have to go ahead into Google and grab the client ID and create an application and all of stuff, so you can grab the credentials. And it's pretty much the same thing happens for every other service. Facebook has that too. I believe GitHub has that too. So, you know, wherever you go, you're going to find this way to like authenticate people and give them like client secrets and a client ID, basically just to connect and be able to authenticate themselves into their server and be able to access the data. So that's basically what it is in here. I already like got into cloud or console.cloud.google.com. This is where you want to go. So it's just Google Cloud Platform in here, and make sure to sign in your email here. I'm using my personal email. So what I did, I just go ahead to like create an application, which I already did. So in here, I got the name of this is called React SSO or single sign-on. And yeah, you can go ahead and create that just from scratch. You can just hover over there. I believe for a free account, there's like 12 apps you can create. So you can just hover over there, you create it. And this is pretty much what you get. So you get a dashboard, library, and everything. And where you want to go is actually onto credentials. So there isn't much of info you need to enter the app, just like basic stuff. If you've got a domain, which you can ignore, like basic description of the application, a name, and all of that sort of stuff. So you can just, you know, next, and you are good to go. And afterwards, you go to the credentials tab in here, and you're going to find the interesting part. So the credentials are, you're going to find like from like the right hand side in here. I already hid mine, so they are completely hidden to you. You won't be able to see them, but I got the client ID and I got the client secret. So those are actually what you need. So you have to go ahead and copy the client ID in here and the client secret. So those are the most critical parts that you need to be able to use Google Sign On for your application. So you just copy the client secret, which is called secret because it should be a secret. And that's why we are actually doing or creating an Express server from the first, just to keep these kind of stuff secret. So the client ID just like identifies your application as secret. It's kind of like a password, allows it to access the Google APIs. So that's pretty much what you need. And one more thing, there's actually here URIs. So authorized redirects URIs. And this is where you input your URLs that are actually authorized from Google to be able to redirect into like an application. There was actually just security measures, and I added this one because this is where I want to like redirect whatever's successful, or I want all the successful kind of like requests to go into here. I'm going to explain this briefly as we go into it, but for now you can ignore this, but later on you have to add it. So yeah, I will tell you more about this as we go over. So that's basically what you need. That's all for the Google Console. You just copy the client secret and the client ID. You go into like the .env.sample in here, which I already created for you guys, which has basically everything that you need. So it has like cookie key, it has DWT secret in here. You can have like a secret key for it. DB name, DB user, and DB password. Those are pretty simple as well. And what you want to do is pretty much like rename this into .env, but like remove this .sample, so this one can take effect. And what you can do here, like you do Google client ID equals to whatever ID in here, and plus you got also Google client secret, and this one also has to be your secret Google. So you just paste them here and you are ready to go. And make sure to rename that to .env, otherwise it won't take effect and it won't work for you. Pretty cool. So that's basically all you do. I already did that on my .env in here as all the secrets. I'm not going to show you all of that, guys. But yeah, you got the point. All you have in here, like you can of course have your database credentials as well in here, DP name and user and password. I already did the setup for all of those, so you don't have to worry about them for that particular video tutorial. So we got everything to get started, and we are pretty much ready to go in order to get into the Passport.js or the OAuth implementation on our server. So first things first in here, what we want is actually to be able to use a particular strategy. And as we all know, Passport.js is just built into like this plugin ecosystem or strategy ecosystem where Passport.js is actually the core. And whenever you want to add your service like Google or Facebook or GitHub into Passport.js, you simply create a strategy for it that's gonna like use Passport.js cores and, you know, provide it with Google sign-ons and give it a little bit different handling and all that kind of stuff. It's just like more like a plugin, okay? So that's what we want. There is a strategy basically does handle that for us, and it's called the Google OAuth2 strategy for Passport.js. So that's what we want to install, and that's what you need to go ahead and install. So I already did install all of those. So what you need to go ahead and install, Passport.js should be already installed in this project, but if you don't have it, make sure to go ahead and install it. So let me go ahead and show you what you need to install. So just do npm install, and first, most basically, you're gonna need Passport. That's it. And if you want Passport GWT as I do in here, you can have it, but that's not actually our scope for this video. So we can skip it for now. And for Google OAuth, so you have to go passport-google-OAuth2.0. And you have to spell it that exact same name, and you have to go ahead and install all of those. So that's basically what you need for that. Everything else is going to be installed for you if you clone my project, but I'm not sure if you have like a different server you want to add OAuth into, but that's basically what you need to do OAuth. So yeah, we can go ahead and use all of those just for doing OAuth. And there is one more thing. There is the cookie session, which is just a library that allows us to maintain a session on our cookies and send them back on like responses from our Express API in here. And this one will allow us to actually maintain and authenticate people for a long period of time. For example, you want to just like keep a cookie and maintain the session for this logged in user for like a day or two, a week or whatever. And of course, the session is going to be related to the user who just got logged in or signed up using his Google account using OAuth, of course. So that's basically what we want for here, and make sure to go ahead and install that since we are going to be needing it later on. So that's basically what you need. Hit enter, everything's going to be installed. I already did install all of those, so I'm not going to go through all of this again. Okay, pretty basic. Now let's go ahead and get started and create I'm going to create like exclusive the auth folder in here. Already has a Passport.js file, which basically uses the passport and uses this strategy as a middleware. So that's exactly what we want to do with the Google OAuth2 strategy and be able to like tell Passport, oh, we got a strategy, so we want to use this one, and this is how we want to configure it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that real quick in here. And I'm going to be naming this Passport Google, and I'm going to be just like naming it SSO.js for single sign-on, and that should be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, pretty easy. Now let's go ahead and import Passport first, and of course it's the most important part of all of those. So Passport, we get it from Passport. We're going to have import also the Google strategy. So Google strategy equals require, and it's going to be Passport Google OAuth, and make sure to access the strategy inside of it, otherwise it won't work for you. We also basically going to be needing to access our like user. So I'm not telling you, I'm going to just like explain everything like from Sequelize and databases and all of that. You should already be familiar with this. If you're not familiar with the Sequelize ORM, of course, you're going to be finding another video tutorial link down in the description below. I have a full video explaining Sequelize from start to finish for beginners. So if you never used Sequelize and you want to learn it, you can find the description. I'm not going to explain it. So here I got already a model created for me, which is just a basic user that has a full name, email, password, a Google ID, and a picture. And this is a very important part in here, actually to notice, is you have to have like the Google ID in here or whatever other service you are actually doing OAuth for. For example, if you got like Facebook or GitHub, you want to name this like GitHub ID, because you're going to be using the GitHub's a user's ID in here and store it in here. Later on, you can use it to like, send a request to the GitHub's API and grab more info about it or something. And this one just going to identify that, oh, this guy came from Google and this guy has this Google ID, which is, you have to store it in here in a string, and you can allow nulls, of course. But anything other than that, so that's basically what I have in here. So that's basically what I added. I also added like a picture from the previous tutorials code. So that's optional. I just wanted to like show you guys how that works. That's basically what it is. So the Google ID in here is pretty important for you. Yeah, it could be nullable, no problems, but that's what it got for the user. So let's go ahead and import the user model so we can create a user and manage all of that kind of stuff. So let me go ahead and like do require, go back, models, and grab the user. Pretty cool. We're done with the imports. Now let's go ahead and use the strategy inside of like Passport. So how we do that, we can go ahead and do like Google new, and we initialize this, like we create a new instance of the Google strategy, and we pass in here all the configuration objects going to be needed. Now first, the most important part is actually the client ID, which we already got it inside of like env.sample as Google client ID and a Google client secret. So all you have gotta do in here is just basically jump into there and grab this one, so you can pretty much get into the path of working with this. So what we can do, we can go and use process.env, then we can access this, which is Google client ID. Next, we're also going to be needing the client secret, so you can do the same thing for it, Google client secret, and that should do the job perfectly. Now there is another one which is called like callback URL, and this basic callback URL, it's actually the URL I talked about before, that I wanted you guys to add it into your like whitelisted URLs on the Google console for the application you just created. So this URL is actually going to be like redirected into whenever you finish the sign on with the Google OAuth. So when you just get the Google's account, you click the account, you choose it, and you accept that you want to sign in into this particular website through Google. Google is actually, if you got successful results with that, how you do it is going to just call you or redirect you to this callback URL. And make sure this callback URL actually points to your application. So whenever you redirect, it's going to redirect it back to your application, and oh, there's a successful call from here. And of course, the URL is going to have like some parameters like the access token and whatever other data you requested for the Google. So make sure to carefully have this URL right over here. Mine, what's going to be here is actually going to have HTTP. You know what? Let's go and install this in another one. So callback URL, Google callback URL. And for this one, it's going to be HTTP for me. It's going to be localhost 5000, and this is the port that currently the server is actually running on. So make sure to have the right port in here, and it's actually inside of like API v1, because inside of up in here, I'm binding the whole API to API v1 just to make sure that we are running on the same route here. And last but not least, I got it Auth, then I go Google, then I got callback. Okay, you can change the name however, but I think this should be pretty self-explanatory, and it should make sense if you look at it from the first glance. So yeah, it does make a good glance in here. Also, we have to pass request to callback to true, so we can get the request on the callback, and that should make it work properly. Now the second option, or the second parameter it takes in here, is a verify callback. And indeed, this is going to be a callback. I want to call this asynchronous because we're going to be having some promise async await to deal with that. So that's what I wanted to do right here. And for this one, it's basically going to have like a couple of parameters, because whenever the callback is called, so this is how it is called. So this particular function is going to do like the verification, and it's going to like sign your user into pretty much like with Google into your like API. So that's what it's going to do it. So whenever Google signs this one, whenever it verifies that the account is accepted and everything, this callback is going to be called from Google's end with a couple of parameters, and indeed those parameters are going to be needed. Like for example, if you request like the profile URL and all of that, so this is what it's going to be called. This is pretty much the callback is going to be called in here. So you can do like save the profile to database and save the access token of the user who just logged into the database, or do whatever crazy stuff with it you want. So the parameters in here are actually pretty basic. Since we want to like have requests here true, so first request, then second we got access token. So this is basically the access token generated for you to access Google's API, and of course only with the scope you got. We're going to get into the scope in a second. And here we got a refresh token. So the refresh token is going to be having like whenever you have this token dead. So of course this token is going to die at some point. It only has like a short period of time to live. So you have like a day or two, then you have to use this refresh token. Basically this refresh token never dies. So this refresh token, you use it to request a new access token, then you can use the access token. So this one only refreshes the token. That's all it does. That's why, it's pretty self-explanatory. And that's why like Google uses this kind of pattern in here. The other one is actually the profile, which is whatever data you requested from Google. So whenever you sign in with Google, of course, Google is going to tell you what kind of data you want to access on the user's account. And for example, we only want to access first name, last name, for example, his picture and just his email. That's all we want. We don't want to like read his, messages or write to his profile or change his email, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do with Google. And we want just a basic thing, because we want to sign in and we want to have just the ability to sign in with Google, grab his just basic info, and that is it. Just save it in our database and we are done. So that's basically what we want, and that's how we want to handle it. So the profile here is going to have all the data we requested from the Googles or whomever just logged in with his Google account. And last but not least, we got the callback, which is just a function we call whenever we finish our handling in here. Okay, pretty cool. Now, what we want in here in this particular one is actually, whenever we get the chance, is actually to go ahead and check into the database using the Google ID, which is stored inside of the profile, and we check, if this Google ID already exists in the database, which means the user is already registered, which means we only want to log him in, right? We don't want to recreate another account because it does already exist in our database. So we want to just gonna trigger him, and we can say, you're gonna be logging in, and just return him or give them access and give him a session token so we can live for a day or two authenticated into our application. So that's basically what we want. We have to do the check-in into our database, and that's why database is very important to keep tracking in this kind of example. Now, what I want first is go ahead and create a default user. So I'm going to do default user object. And this one is going to be having all the default data we want to map into our database to create a new user. Remember, user in here has a full name, email, password, Google ID, and a picture. Okay, so first things first, we want the full name. And we want to access this. So we want to do a quick trick. So profile here, if you take a look on it, profile has a couple stuff that we can have from Google's profile, like display name, emails, name, photos, profile URL, provider, which is basically Google, and a username. So what we want display name. I think we want name, and name is an object, so it has given name, family name, and middle name. So we want the given name, do a space, and we can do name again, then we can do family name. So that's, we can have a full name in here, just quick formatting using ESX. And next we want the email. So the email is going to be profile.emails. It has a couple of emails, not only one, and you have to access the first one because it's an array, and you have to access the value, not the type. Pretty straightforward. And this is all related into Google's API. So if you're working with a different service like Facebook or GitHub, you have to check the documentation in order to see how or which data is actually provided, or how the strategy basically handles that behind the scenes, okay? And for the profile picture, so we want to access photos, and photos is an array, so we have to access 0, then we have to access the value, and last but not least, the most important part, we have to store the Google ID. So we have profile and just basically ID, because this is your identifier on Google's database. So this is your main ID here. Okay, so we got a default user in here. Now what we want is actually to go to the database, check if the user already exists using the current provided Google ID. If he does, just gonna log him in. If he doesn't, so we're gonna create a new account using this default users object. Hope it makes sense. Let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to have await. I'm gonna do await here. We're gonna have a new user. I'm gonna use find or create, which basically looks for a particular criteria. If it doesn't find it, it's gonna fall back and create us a default user. So where in here, we wanna just do a word with the Google ID to profile.id. Okay, and defaults, we want to default it to our default user. So if it doesn't find with this one, it's just going to be creating a new user using this particular object. And that should make it pretty self-explanatory. So let's have a catch. If any errors happens along the way, what we want to properly handle those. So we can do console log error signing up. And I can go ahead and console log the error, and I want to call the callback now. And the callback is basically just like a Node.js callback, and it has this kind of format. Error comes first, then whatever data you want to pass it again. So we have got an error. We don't have a data because there's an error happening there. So we're going to pass in null. Cool. Now we want to return if everything goes fine and the user is actually logged in and everything. So we want to check if the user, which is the user is good and everything from that side. So we're gonna have a callback, null as error, and we have like user and the user to be 0, because this find or create is gonna return an array, whether it's created or not. So you see like it returns an array for promise from this particular Typescript. So you got the point in here. So make sure to check if the user and the user 0, because this is an array. And that should make sense. Pretty cool. Now we got two good things. We got all the Google strategy configured properly with client ID, client secret, default user, which creates us the user to the database basically and saves all of that. Pretty cool. Now we got the strategy done. Now what we need, the next step and the most important step, is actually to be able to serialize and deserialize the user from the request. Because how authentication works from like Passport and this like or pretty much Express with Passport.js strategies is actually you got this session token, and inside of the session token it pretty much works as GWT if you're familiar with it. You got this like ID of the user saved inside of that session token, which is basically saved inside of like the user's browser cookies or local storage or whatever. So this session token has got this user's ID kind of encoded there. It's not visible because it's encoded using an algorithm. So whenever the user browser sends it to the server is going to use a middleware and basically checks, oh, there is this header. This is the actual authorization token. So we take it, we decode it, we grab the ID, and this is where deserialization happens. So deserializing the user is pretty much like we grab the session token, we grab from it the ID, whatever data we stored into it, basically is going to be the ID. And whenever we get the ID, we're just going to go ahead and check the database. We say, oh, is there actually any user exists with particular ID? If it says yes, pretty cool. The user has actually existed and we can authenticate and we can just go and continue forward. Otherwise, just throw him an error, say you can't authenticate because the user doesn't exist, whatever that ID is. Cool. Then another one is actually serialization. And serialization is actually doing the opposite of deserialization. So serialization is actually creating the session token, which means you grab the user data, you get of it like the ID, you put it inside of it like this session token and you encode it and you send it to the browser to save it inside of a cookie so you can authenticate the user the whole time, like the whole session, like for a day, whatever the cookie can last. And that's basically what we're going to be doing in here. And luckily, Passport.js does all of that behind the scenes in a really smooth way. So let's go and have Passport.js. I'm going to use serialize user, which is basically a callback function that takes the user first and a callback in here, which means like we can call whenever we finish. Now the user, this one is actually the same user we got in here, because simply what we're doing, find or create. So whenever we do find or create, it's going to be like basically take the user here. Like if it finds it already registered, it's just going to basically return it. Otherwise, create it and return it. So both ways, it's going to return the user object. And this one, we're going to get it right here. Now, what we're going to do with it, pretty simple. Let's go to console log so we can see serializing a user. And I want to go ahead and console log the user here to make it pretty simple. Then you can call the callback, error to be null. And here you have to provide the user ID, as I said before. So you have to go user.id for it to work properly for you and be able to serialize. So that's basically for serialization. Let's go ahead and do a deserialization. And we can do deserialize user. So here, for deserialization, as I said before, it decodes the session token, which in this case, we already like put the user ID inside of the session token. Now, the session token only has the user ID, which means right here, we're going to have the user ID. Then you can have another callback basically, just to make it know if it's done or not. Okay. So that's basically what we want. We want to make sure to have this async because we want to work with something. Now, I want to go ahead and look where on the database for this particular ID to find the user. So we can go ahead and do like user.find one, and find one in here. You can go ahead and do where ID equals ID, and I want to catch if any errors happen. So errors console log error deserializing, and I can go ahead like here call a callback with the error, of course, and null. Just a pretty basic stuff. Okay. Now the other one we have to check. If the user exists, which means if this object is valid, all we have to call is actually the callback and pass in the user object next in order for this to work properly. So take a look in the callback and here see the second one it takes an Express user, which is basically your user in here you grab from the database. So that's what we want in here, and that's what we're basically doing. So let's go and just console log this. Okay, I want to deserialize a user, and I want this to have a user. Just a basic login so we can know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. Now, pretty cool. We got the strategy, configured. We got serialization and deserialization here for cookies and authentication and everything. Now, it's a pretty good step. Let's go ahead into the next step, which means creating our API to be able to allow a user to register or log in or authenticate or whatever. So we got everything configured in here. Now we just have to use it in order to be able to allow Google sign on into our API in here. So going to the API, we're going to be adding another one. So I'm going to be adding login with Google.js. And this file is basically like another API, which basically exposes a router, allows us to play around with it. Okay. So what we want first import Express. So we're going to require Express as always. The second thing in here, we want also Passport.js. So we're going to do Passport to grab Passport right here. That should make it pretty self-explanatory. Now we can go ahead and access the router of Express. So we can do express.router. Actually, I think we can, we can access it this way straight through because it's a static one. That should make the point straight into it. Now, how we can tell to log in, either log in or register, pretty much logging in or registering is the same thing, because what we're doing in here is actually doing a double check-in. If it doesn't exist, create it. If it does exist, just move along with it and have the user fetched from the database. So it's both ways. It's either log in or register, the same one. It doesn't really matter. Now we can go ahead and here allows it to access this API. So we can do a router.get. And for example, we want to go like login, then Google. So this is our API, and this is the endpoint we want people to use to log into Google basically. So that's how we want to use it. Now we can do Passport, and we can use Authenticate, which is just a function that allows us to authenticate using a particular strategy. And since right now we only got Google, we can use Google. And here for the parameters or the options, we have to pass in the scope that we want to log in the current user and like which kind of data we want from Google to provide us with. And likely we only just want a simple basic data like the profile and email. That's all we want for authentication. Basically, we don't want to read or write other data that Google has. Not all of those, just pretty basic stuff. And that should make it. That's all you do. And whenever you call this API, whenever you just go get this API, it's going to redirect you to Google, and it's going to just allow you to use Google Sign-On in this simple way. It's just as that easy. Believe me, it is super easy as this one. So likely we got Passport.js taking us to the moon, so we got all of that happening. Now let's go ahead and set up the callback we talked about before, because the callback in here is actually registered. So whenever we successfully registered or logged in from Google's side, it's going to call this URL. So we have to go ahead and have this URL handled properly from our side. So for doing that, we have to do like router.get, and we pass in whatever this endpoint is, because that's what we want to handle from this side. And we want to call Passport.authenticate as well, which allows us to authenticate again because we got the callback. Now for the options, we have to call a different ones. Like for example, we want to do, for example, a fail or failure message. If any error happens during authentication, we want to show him a message. Like you can do, cannot log in to Google, please try again later or something. You can have all sort of stuff in there. We can also have, for example have failure redirect, which basically allows you to redirect to a particular web page if anything happens. So for example, if it fails here on Google's side, it's going to redirect you to your own web page, and you got like this specific page custom made for it to handle this kind of failures for Google, and you say, oh, you can't log in with Google, please try it again later, or Google services has an issue or something. And this is where you want to redirect. And of course, this has a success as well, like a success callback for this one to work. Now, what I want, because we have an Express in here, backend and front end with React, so we want to redirect him to the React server for this to work, and like just delegate all the web page rendering and all the kind of logics to render web pages to React. So for that, let's go ahead and create 2 properties in here. I'm gonna have to do like success login URL basically, and this one is actually where it redirects you if it logs in successfully. It has to redirect you somewhere you say, oh, welcome, or you can have a session or generate something or update your Redux store, whatever. So I'm gonna go to 3000, and inside of that we want to go to login. This is just a custom one because we're gonna implement this later on React side. So we're gonna have all of that copy paste because we don't want. So we're gonna go login error for error login URL. So pretty basic. Now we're gonna have like error login URL and success redirect success login URL. Pretty simple, right? That should make it pretty self-explanatory. And you can have another one, like for example, we do request response, and this one basically sends like thank you for registering or something. If everything goes fine, if everything goes fine, it's gonna show it only on the Google's like account page where you just like clicked on the account and signed in. And we can just go in and do like send thank you for signing in. Cool, right? Yeah, pretty simple. Now, if you want to access the user, the user is actually inside. If you want to go in and do like console log user, the user is actually inside request.user. And from where this came from is basically how the nature of Express and Passport.js works together, is actually providing it through the request. So each request now, each authenticated request, which means each request has a header for authentication with a valid session token. It's going to have this request.user, and this user is going to be a valid user, fetched from our database, and everything's going to work the same way as expected to be. So if you go back in here, that user is actually passed in from this callback we have in here. It's basically passed in from that one, like this particular deserialization, because deserialization happens whenever a request is received from, of course, the front end, from a browser, and it has this kind of like session token. So it deserializes it, it decodes it, and it looks for the user in the database, and it passes this callback. Then this callback takes it into that request.user. So that's basically how it works in that particular site. Now we got everything in here. We got the Auth2.get, router, and everything. Let's go ahead and give this a test. Let's go try to go log in Google and see what happens. So if you go localhost 5000, and this is, basically our homepage. Nothing is going on behind the scenes there. So let me just zoom in a little bit. Now, if you go to API v1 login Google, that sounds not to be working because we haven't imported that here. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. Login with Google API. So we're gonna have require that. Okay, login with Google, and we can do router.use login with Google API. All right, pretty cool. Now I'm guessing also I haven't exported that, so make sure to do module.export equals router for Express to properly understand that. Cool. Now a known authentication strategy, Google, and because we haven't imported anything into here, so you don't have to be surprised about all of those. Okay, so we can have all of those going on. So what I can do is I can do up, or we can go ahead and import the whole Passport strategy first. So we can do like go require auth, then can go Passport Google SSO. So I should import it, and also make sure to do app.use Passport. So make sure to import Passport and do initialize. So you have to use this middleware, plus you have also to use Passport.session middleware, because we're going to be using some cookie sessions later on. So make sure to set up those properly here for all of everything to work properly. Okay, let's go back, refresh that, and boom, just go into this URL. It's going to redirect us to account.google.com, OAuth2, and it basically got all of my emails in here and everything. So looking absolutely amazing. So whenever you click in here, you are supposed to log in at some point. But let's go and try to click, for example, my email, and it just like as cruise in here, we have been redirected to localhost 3000 login success, which means it has successfully logged in for us, and it did the redirection. And this is basically having a React application running on, just a basic one. I'm gonna get into it later on, but that is absolutely working fine and is doing the redirection. Cool. How awesome is that? We've just been able to do this in a couple of lines of code with Passport strategy and OAuth from Google, and everything seems to be working absolutely fine. Pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and try to authenticate the user, actually authenticate the user from the session token, because I'm not sure if now we got a session token saved or not. So if you refresh, I think those are actually old ones. Yeah, they are totally old ones. So if you remove those, they won't exist. But let's go ahead and try to be able to put those session tokens into our cookies on the browser so we can keep authenticated the whole time, okay? So what we can do, we can go up.js, and basically right now what we want is actually use the cookie session that we did use or did install before. So let's go and import that real quick up here. So I'm gonna have cookie session, I'm gonna acquire cookie session. And for this one, so make sure to go ahead and do up.use for every kind of middleware. Always you have to do that. So cookie session in here, you have to create an instance, initialize it, Then you can pass in whatever configuration you want. For example, the max age in here, I want it to be a day. So for a day has a 24 hours, convert it to a minute, convert it into a seconds, then convert it to a milliseconds, because that's the value it takes in here, milliseconds. Cool. Now the keys is actually you have to provide them with like secret keys to be able to encrypt and encode those cookies. So the keys likely already added those into the env. So you see cookie secret in here, so you can scramble whatever key you want in here. Just go through it. Yeah, I already did mine, so you can go process.env and I believe it's cookie key. Sweet. And one more actually thing that I wanted to point out, guys, is if you want to access like process and env and access this env file on your other projects, if you want to set up, make sure to use .env. So install the package and use .env.config in here. Otherwise, you won't be able to read this file and populate it to the process environment variables. So make sure to do that to make it work properly. Now, cool. We got the cookie session in here. We got everything authenticated properly. Yeah, we are ready to go to use cookies and authenticate with them. Now, if you want to actually authorize people, like have a protected route, and only authenticated people or authenticated user can have access into the route and anybody else can't. So what you can do that is you can have a simple middleware to just check if the request has an user object, and you can deny depending on this. So you can have an add. We're not going to be needing this much, but yeah, that's why you need this. You need like protected routes, and this is how you implement it. So I was going to create a middlewares folder, for example, Auth.js. And for this one, for example, there's like a folder that, or pretty much a function that does that. For example, we can do like module export, and this function, let's say, is user authenticated. And this function is basically like a normal middleware, so it has a request, response, and a next. And you got the logic in here. So what you do, you can go ahead and check if request.user. So if this is a valid object, if it's not null or undefined, which means the user has actually authenticated on this particular request and everything is working fine. So he has the right to access so. So all you can do, go ahead and just call next. That's it. Next is going to just call it and make it move to the next middleware on the stack. And that's basically how Express pretty much works. Okay, else, if that is not what the case, if the user doesn't exist, you can go in and respond immediately with a status code. You say response status code 401 for unauthorized, and you can just send something, you must log in first. Pretty cool. And that route can be used anywhere, pretty much this middleware can be used anywhere. So you can have like another protected one, for example, router get. For example, like you go protected or something, or just a test route. Then you can have this one is user authenticated. So it checks this middleware goes through first. Then you can have whatever other middleware in here with request response, and you can have it like does whatever. So if it's not authenticated, it's going to immediately return with a response, you must log in first. If it's authenticated, it's going to go through to the next one because we are calling next in here. And that's basically how you do a simple authentication if you need it, of course. But all we have to do right now is go ahead and jump into our React application and get started with React project in order to bind it with this one and create the login button and everything and have everything connected into this place. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So for the React application, we're going to be creating an application or setting up a project using Create React App CLI. And we're going to be using TypeScript with Redux Toolkit. And luckily for us, CRI provides this kind of like ready-made template from other contributors and other code developers. So we got the template. All we have to do is just put a single line, and we're going to get everything ready-made for us with TypeScript and Redux Toolkit plus React, of course, all in a single project so we can get started with. So all I have to do, go to npx, and you can do like create React app. Then you can give it a name, for example, my app in here, and you can have just provide a template, which is just like TypeScript Redux. And that is it. Just click enter. It's going to create you this project and going to have everything set up for you. So luckily I already did all of those. So I don't need to go through all of these again. I did set up the project. I've got everything in here. Even I got a simple hello world, just a single line there going on. So if you go back, clearly see this is what we saw before. So let me remove that. And that's what you get. Simple hello world from our application. Now, how we can bind these? We're going to be needing a couple of dependencies to install first in order to get started. So let's go back to open up a new terminal. I'm going to be using yarn in this case because here it has like yarn.lock and the whole project has been installed and created using yarn. So I'm just going to try to keep consistent on those and just use yarn. So I'm going to do yarn, and first things first, I'm going to be using stock components. So I'm going to have those. Also going to have Axios for doing HTTP requests on the fly from React. So that is a good part as well. We're also going to be needing React router DOM. And this one, if you're not familiar with it, it basically allows us to use or pretty much create multi-page React applications. So we can have different pages and each page, has bound to a particular route. Like for example, login, one is home page, one is logout or whatever. So that's how we use it there. And last but not least, we're going to have a React Google button, which is, basic projects created by the community, of course, that is going to allow us to just simply render out a sign with Google button with just this awesome Google logo. So we don't have to just go ahead and create and worry about all of those. So it's everything ready made for us. So we can go into like React Google button and we are good to go. So click enter, save it, install it. I already did all of those. I already installed dependencies, so you can get up and running in no time. Pretty cool. Now, if you take a look on the application here, it has a store, which is basically like a Redux store. So if you're not familiar with Redux or Redux Toolkit or Typescript or basically React at all, but I don't think so. So if you're not familiar with Redux anyway, there's actually a full video from scratch for beginners. I did this in just like a couple of months ago. And yeah, you should go ahead and watch this before watching this video because I'm not going to explain Redux from scratch. I'm just going to use Redux. So make sure to understand what is Redux, how to use it. Plus, if you want Redux Toolkit and TypeScript, you can watch my latest video there with like Pro React with TypeScript and Redux and GraphQL and all of those. You can watch it to grasp on what we are going to be doing here. So yeah, without further ado, that's what we got in here. And plus, what I did also have, I have like Redux logger just to help us log everything to the console. Cool. Now let's go ahead and get started. And what we want is first to set up React router to have multi-page apps into our application. So for the React router, we have to use like the provider. So we can go ahead and do like which is browser router as router. So I'm gonna just like do an alias for this one. I'm gonna import this in or from React router DOM, okay? And this is the browser router. And you have to wrap this. You have to wrap it like the whole application has to be wrapped with the browser router in here in order for this to work properly. Cool. Let me just change back to the previous terminal. And yeah, we got everything in there. So that is actually good. Now we can create multi-pages. I want to do it right here. And I want to use the switch already. So the switch actually another component from React router. So I'm going to use it from React router DOM. And the switch in here allows us to switch between pages depending on criteria, so like the route and everything. So we want to have a couple of different routes for all of those. So I'm going to have a route that is having a path of / which is just a home page. And have an exact one. So I'm going to say welcome home for this one. Another one, for example, I'm going to have a route is going to be exact path. And for example, login. And this one is going to have the login button, which is just basically a sign in with Google, as I said before, just to sign in with Google. Okay. So let's go ahead and grab this. So Google button, luckily I got imported that. So Google button from React Google button, that should make do the job perfectly. And I bet there will be another route for like, I'm believing another login error routes as we just like pointed it to before. So if you go back here, if you take a look, when we did create that? So on the callback URL, so for this one, for error, we go to login / error, the login / success for success. So that makes a lot of sense, of course, to be able to use all of those. So I'm gonna just doing this. I'm gonna bind it right here and work it. So error login, and please try again later or whatever. The wording doesn't really matter. Okay, pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and see how our application does and how we can go ahead and make it a little bit better. So here we got welcome home already. It works. The pages work. If you go to like / login, I'm gonna have this really cool sign in with Google button. So we should be able to click on this and we should have like a pop-up window to sign in with Google. So that is actually working. What I want here, I want to have another link. There's actually a link that is, I believe the link should be from there. So that link is going to take us to the login page briefly. So login. So whenever we click it, we should be able to go to login from the home page. So we click it, it takes us to the home or pretty much the login page, which is pretty great. So yeah, we got the login here. We got everything we're gonna be needing. Now what we want is actually from login. So whenever we want actually to click on this button, we want to have this pop-up window, which is a completely new window. So I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with that if you ever signed in with Google. So you're going to have this like small window that is going to be popped up for you whenever you try to sign in with Google. And it's going to have like all the list of your accounts. And whenever you select an account, it's going to just like, take a second or two to load in. Then it's going to say, oh, thank you for signing on. And the window is going to auto close. Then it's going to redirect your page into some page and say, oh, thank you for authenticating. It's going to update the state and everything. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in that particular case scenario. Okay, so that should make it pretty hot up, and let's go ahead and try to make that working. So what I want here is actually whenever we click, so I can add an on-click handler for this. So I'm going to have another function. This function is going to be called redirect, for example, to Google SSO or single sign-in. And this is going to take care of all of it. And basically I'm going to have this as async because I'm going to do some request on it. And so I can bind this one. So you can say on click, you can go ahead and redirect to Google SSO, and that should make it pretty self-explanatory as well. So what I want here, first things first, is actually to open up a window that points the Windows URL to our web server, which pretty much going to redirect it and do the authentication for us, right? So what I want to do, go ahead and create a new window. So I'm going to do const new window equals window.open. So I'm going to use vanilla JavaScript API to open up a new window, and the URL in here. So I'm going to name this Google login URL, and it's basically going to be HTTP localhost 5000, and it's going to be API v1 I believe login then Google. Okay, yeah, and that's the one we want is like the page to open up first. Second thing in here, we want the page to be blank, which means open up a brand new window, not a new tab, a new window. So that's what we want it there. I also want a couple of stuff like width. For example, I want let's say a 500 width by 600 heights. Okay, that should make it pretty good for us at a first glance. So that should open it, that should point us to, and that should actually redirect us to like login with Google. So let's go and try with this. If we go back here, basically we've got login, we click onto it, and there you go. So we already got like a window popping up for us, and simply we got the whole accounts we're going to be needing to actually log in with Google. And yeah, it's pretty much doing the redirect for us, and the service taking care of it, and it's crazy we got a Google URL on top of there. So how sweet is that? Pretty simple. First step is done. Now let's go ahead and have it to the next step. Now what we want is actually whenever we click, we want to have pretty much the window, like, take us somewhere and authenticate and redirect us back, of course. So now if we try to do it, let's go ahead and do login, select a basic account. It's going to take us all of that, and it's in here, it's redirecting us to localhost 3000 login, then success. So we have to define a page for this to work. So whenever a success is done, we're going to just have a page say, thank you for logging in. And then after like a second or something, it's going to auto close for us. So that's going to be doing next. So for this one, I'm going to have it set up, containers, and I'm going to create a new container. I'm going to basically name it login success page. That should be pretty self-explanatory. Then I'm going to have it index.tsx. So I'm going to import React. Okay. I'm going to export a function, which is basically login success. We don't need props for that to work. So that's basically the page we're going to be needing here, is actually to log into. And for the page, what I want is just, okay. Yeah, we got tab moves focus. All right. So I'm going to return a div, and this div, all it does is just like, thanks for logging in. All right. That should make it pretty simple, right? Now I want to also use effects, because we want this page to detonate in like a second or something, like to auto close itself, because everything is done. So bad experience to just leave this page or this window more particularly open. So we want to just like get rid of it all in just like a second. Okay, so I'm going to do like set timeout, and for this set timeout, I want to go ahead and do like, for example, in a second, I can do window.close. And by window, I mean the current window that this script or this page is being rendered on, which means like the child window. Okay, and this window should be closed on as soon as that. So let's go back at TSX, and I'm going to create another route on top of this one, of course. And I'm going to have exact, I'm going to have path, and it's going to be login success. And that route, you know what, let's go ahead and just point this components. So I'm going to just say components, and it's going to be login success component. So it's going to render that whenever this path is matched up. So let's go and try that again. We click on this, we get the page, we choose an account, Google does the job for us, and there you go. We got thanks for logging in, half a second or a second, it just auto closed for us. Now, what we want, whenever this auto closes, we want the page to detect, oh, the window is closed, which means everything went fine. Then what we can do is go ahead and check, like do a request to the API, check if the user is actually authenticated. If so, we can just go ahead and like refresh the page and say, oh, welcome to the page and thank you for authenticating, and everything would be fine. Now, another one here, if you notice, instead of application, then cookies for the localhost 3000, we got 2 cookies set for us. And those cookies are actually set just like right now. And basically those cookies are set up from authenticating to Google. So if we try to do that again, if I try to Google and choose an account, you're going to see these cookies coming up to life. So whenever we close this one, try to refresh, there you go. We got the cookies saved for us in here. And those cookies are going to allow us to do a session and authenticate us for pretty much like a day or something, as long as the cookies can live. Sweet. Now we got everything done, but a couple of stuff on the React end. So let's go ahead and jump into React here real quick. And what I want is actually to do a timer to check constantly, like every half a second or every second, to check if the window, if the child window is closed. If so, we can go ahead and check if the user is authenticated or not. And it's the only way to do it, because you can actually, some of you might say, oh, why not just having an event listener checking if the window is closed? Well, we can't do that because this is literally not like stable, and it doesn't work every single time on all browsers and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's better to use the widely supported and better version of this rather than just like use really tricky one. So I'm going to create a timer, and this one is going to be like a Node.js. I think timer. That should be yeah, it should be a timeout. I'm gonna say timeout or null. Initialize it to null. Now, what I want here is actually want to do if a new window. So if a new window is created, it's a valid object. I'm gonna have timer, and I'm gonna use set interval. So set interval is gonna run like every single half a second. So each second you're gonna have two time checking for these, and I want to make sure this have let instead of const for this to work properly. Then we can have the set interval. Now for the set interval, what we can do, go ahead and just like check if a new window is closed. If it is closed, you can pretty much do whatever. So we can do like console.log, yay, we are authenticated. Cool, super sweet. And you can have in here like another function that fetches the user for you. It does some checking on that side or something. Then pretty much make sure to go ahead and dispose the timer, otherwise it won't work for you later on, but it keeps running forever. So make sure to do clear interval and you pass it in the timer. And that's it. Pretty cool. Now if whenever the window should close, we're gonna get this this console log for this one. So we grab the window, we sign in, and I think the window is already closed. Yeah, I cleared it super fast. So we sign in here. Thanks for logging in. It closes, and there you go. We got a message immediately say, yes, you are authenticated, which we're not, but we don't know yet. But the window is closed, so we can do our move. Now let's go and have another kind of function. What it does, it goes checks if the user is actually authenticated. So we can do fetch. Like I can do like fetch auth user, which basically if the user is authenticated or not. So we can go ahead and tell if the user is authenticated. Now for this one, we have to implement it first on the server, otherwise it won't work. So if we go back to the server in here, let's go ahead and create another API for user. I'm gonna name it user.js. I'm gonna have Express. So require Express here, and I'm gonna have a router from Express. Make sure to do module exports router for this to work. Now for the router, we're gonna have a GET request. So whenever you go inside of auth, then user, then what we want to do, we got request and response and everything. I want to just simply go in and do like response.json and make sure it's a JSON for this to work properly. We want to send back the request.user. And of course, you have to use the middleware we did create before. So we're going to have is the user authenticated, and we need to use this middleware in here. So we can check if the user is authenticated, we can go move on, and we can send him back the current user on the JSON. So let's go in and use that here. So user API user, then we can do router.use the user API. Pretty sweet and easy. So now we can go ahead and fetch in the user, and we can check if pretty much the request came back to us as 200. Everything is success. We can say, oh, we already authenticated with our session and everything. The cookies are working and everything. Otherwise, we say failed, then we can't. Pretty much the user is not properly logged in, so we can redirect him to another page or something. So to do that, you can have a response, and you can go and use await. I can go and grab Axios, so import that. I can do a get, and for the URL in here we want to check is of course HTTP and localhost. Then you can say 5000. And I believe it's API v1. I always forget about these. So auth and a user. Cool. If we catch, if any errors happen along the way, also .log not properly authenticated. So we can say that we're not pretty much authenticated properly, and you can call whatever you want here. And of course you want to check if response and response.data. So you can say console log dot user response dot data. That's basically what it is. But for one more thing in here, since we're actually doing cross-origin, so if you are pretty much in the same case, we're doing pretty much cross-origin. This application, this React front-end application is running on port 3000 localhost, and the backend or the server is running on localhost 5000, which is completely different from each other, which means this one is completely running on a different cross-origin than the other one. So that should make a lot of sense, right? So for this one to work, we have to use credentials. So we have to pass in a particular parameter to Axios. We do with credentials to set it to true. For this Axios, so it should be like, oh, credentials is set true. So it can go ahead into cookies and can send cookies alongside the request headers for this to work. But this one will work without server, and that's because server has some CORS policy or cross-site origin policies. So it won't work because simply here we're actually having, if you go back, if you go back to CORS in here, you're going to see it like it's basically configured to have everything allowed to work, which is not as we want it to be because we are sending credentials, and when sending credentials, we have to specify the domain name and the credentials in here to be working fine. So we have to pass in a config object, and we can say like origin, and we can specify custom origin for our like front end. So origin is actually localhost 3000. So you have to specify that specifically, and of course you have to say credentials to be sure to allow credentials. Otherwise, it won't work for you. So you have to do that. Make sure you save. The server is gonna rerun for you. And that's basically what you need to do for CORS in order for that to work. So let's go and use the fetch user. Now, if the window is closed, you can go and try to fetch an user, and we can see how stuff should be going from that end. Okay, so let's go and try to do that. If we try sign in with Google, click on that, it's going to take us to the success page. It's going to close, and there you go. We got an user. If you take a look on the network tab, we got a network call to the, if you take a look, headers, localhost 5000 API v1 auth user, and it sends them all the request headers needed with authentication and everything. And indeed, it is authenticated, and we get the full user data, which means we are authenticated, and the actual user is authenticated with our session, cookies, and everything is working fine. So we get everything here from picture, updated ad, email, full name, for the currently authenticated user. Super sweet. We're halfway through, and now we are checking if fetch user work, if user is actually authenticated. Now we want to authenticate our application. If you are pretty much on a React application and you are using Redux, well, you're in a actually good place because you can have, Redux is basically having this global store, and you can change the state of a global store and you can manipulate it however you want. But if you don't, you're going to have some issues. You need to work with contacts and all that, which is pretty ugly. So if you can use Redux, that will be super, super easy for you, and that will be really, really cool. So luckily, we got Redux. Let's go ahead and try to do that real quick right now. Now inside of app, I'm going to go and create, let me just move this tabs thing. So I'm going to go and create app-slice.js or real TypeScript. So I'm going to do TypeScript. And this one where we create the state, right? So I'm going to create an interface, and I'm going to up state. And for this one, I'm going to have something like, this shouldn't be equal 0. So yeah, basically for this one, I'm going to say is authenticated, which is just a Boolean, checks if authenticated. Also going to have initial state, which is basically from the up state, and for this one is going to equal to is authenticated to be false. Okay, and what we want, last but not least, we have to create our slice. So we can do up slice equals create slice, and this one of course is going to be imported from Redux.js toolkit. And for the name, I want this to be up. Initial state, you can pass in that to. And reducers, you can have a couple of reducers. Now, I want the reducer here, I want it set is authenticated. and this one is going to be like state and action, and simply we're going to just say state.isAuthenticated equals action.payload, and on the payload basically is going to be a boolean. Okay, now another reducer is set auth user, and in this one we're going to be setting the authenticated user. So all we can do, state dot auth user equals action.payload, and of course we're going to have to add that, so we have to add auth user on top here. It's going to be like an object of a user if you want to define these, but I don't want to do that here. I want to waste time, so we can have just any for now to identify it. So it's going to be any or null, because first it has to be null, and we can have it this way. Pretty cool. Now let's go and export our stuff. So we can do export const set is authenticated and set auth user. I'm gonna have these from the upslice, the actions, and that should be pretty self-explanatory, right? And we want to also like export the reducer itself, so we can do export default, and this one should be upslice dot reducer. Okay, makes sense. Now we go to the store, we can go ahead and use the reducer right there, not hooks, store, and this one I can do like upslice. So you can import it. I can just go and change the name. And all right, pretty cool. Now it's named up and everything. Now the reducer should be connected and the slice also should be connected, and we are actually ready to go ahead and get started working with this. Cool. Now let's go into up.tsx. And in this particular case, what we want is whenever there's an e-user, we want to like set it into the store. We want to like, update the Redux state with that. So for this, we can go ahead and have it this way. And for this one, what I want is pretty much, I can use dispatch. So I can do dispatch equals use dispatch. And this one should be got it here. Now we want to like, whenever we get a response, we want to do a dispatch in action. I want to set is authenticated, which should be true. And also want to dispatch set auth user, which basically should be the current response data. And this is just like my application. This is just like how the logic of my application works. You can have it up different ways. You can just ignore this boolean in here, or you can use it or whatever, but it totally depends on how you want it to be working in this case, and like what the application is pretty much about and what booleans you need to manage and the state and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it all totally depends on your application and the state you're actually pretty much managing. I'm just having it this way, and this should be pretty simple, like simple enough to work with it this way. Now we got the set authenticated and everything. Now what we want eventually, like at the end, if the user is authenticated and we've been able to log in and everything, what we want is basically like redirect him to another page, say, oh, welcome back. Like, for example, we want to redirect him to his dashboard or his account page, or just like a page, say, thank you for signing up using Google. Just something sweet as this. So for like, redirecting, when I use history, and we're going to use the browser history API, so I'm going to do use history, which should be included in React's router. So it's in here, we have it already imported from React's router DOM. So you can use that, and whenever we dispatch those, you can do history push, and for example, you can say there's another route. So for example, we can go and create another one. Let's say this one is going to be here, and it's going to be like welcome, and you can say like welcome back, and we can pretty much like have an username in here, which of course we can also have it imported from here. For example, we want, it's actually this one, we want like so full name of the user. So this is just like a demonstration of what you can do with it. So for example, there's a state, we can do use state, and we can grab or access the state. Then I can do up, then I can do auth user. Then yeah, I want to use auth user, then I want to destruct this. So that's how I want it to be. Okay, and I think this should be as any, if that is just to ignore the typings. Okay, should be good. Now, if we actually do welcome back, like if we're redirected to welcome back, what I can do, you can go and like just say the full name, like welcome back, and whomever the user is actually logged in, full name. And here for the history push, we can go and redirect him to welcome. Sweet, as sweet as that. Just pretty simple. Now, if any errors happens in here, we also want to redirect him to an error page. And for that, of course, you can use history. You can go and do push. Then you can do, for example, login and error. And of course, you can as well go ahead and just like set both, like clear the state. So set is authenticated. You can set it to false, which means he's not. And auth user set it to null, which is of course not if any errors happens, which means you're not authenticated or something. And cool, and that should actually wrap it up all. If we go and test it for one last time, if we go to like, for example, homepage, let's say, oh, the user gets into the homepage, property up of undefined. Okay, yeah, that is expected to happen. We're using use state. It should do a use selector instead. I don't know why it did that, but anyway. So we go back here, we refresh, full name of objects as it is null. Yeah, that is actually right. So I can do a user, then I can just have auth user being returned there. Then I can gonna use this user dot. Okay, I can do user dot full name, I believe. And yeah, so let's go ahead and try again. Hopefully, full name of null. Yeah, I have to like check user and the user dot full name. It's just a basic structure of the web page. Now we got the home page. If we go login, we're gonna get this awesome button. Click on it. You're gonna get this really awesome pop-up. For example, choose my account. Okay, sign up with there. Thanks for logging in. It goes back, and here we have been redirected to welcome to back Islam button. It's actually using our name, and it's being put into the state. If you take a look in console log, screenshot here. Redux logger is actually updating the state. It's showing out this really nicely. So if you take a look, we're sending the set auth user with this payload of mine with email and Google ID and everything. Yeah, we got set is authenticated as well. We got a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes, and everything is being handled properly from the Redux store to the logging in to updating the state and everything. So I guess that it should be wrapping it up, guys. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this kind of video. I'm pretty sure this was like a pretty long video, but I find it's really worth it because I find a lot of people struggling trying to do this kind of stuff, and making something like this happen with React and Node.js and Express and Passport.js and all of that sort of stuff working in piece together. That is just like a, masterpiece, and that is really beautiful to make it happen in this way. So I hope you guys enjoyed it before, as I said before, and hope you guys enjoy it as the rest of the videos. If you like this kind of video tutorials where you come like out of the darkness and try to be smart and try to new stuff on the channel, let me know. I will do more of it, and it will be very enjoyable. So as I said before, thank you guys for watching. See you all hopefully in the next ones.